Hey, what's up, nerds? We have a new segment for you today. This is something new we're doing called The Professor and the Nerd. This is an examination into literary themes in comic books. So you know me, I am Ray Hale, but I'd also like to introduce you to Charlene Williams. Charlene Williams is a retired associate professor of English literature. She has a bachelor's and master's degree in English literature, as well as an EDS in higher education administration. She taught a variety of literature and film courses, as she firmly believes that teachers must instill the love of reading and writing in their students. Over the course of her career in teaching, she served on numerous committees and received grants to further her teaching skills. One of the highlights of her teaching career was a study trip to Spain, which she co-authored and co-led with one of her colleagues. Charlene, how are you?
Good evening, Raymond. How are you?
Life is good. Life is good. I'm excited to be having this conversation with you.
It is my pleasure. I'm very excited also to be included in this effort that you're giving to all of your viewers.
Well, you say that now, but we'll see what happens at the end of the call.
We'll see.
So just a little background on what we're doing. So to the viewers watching at home, I decided that this would be an interesting conversation. And I have actually selected the Dark Phoenix Saga as it was published in Classic X-Men 1 through issues 44. And this ongoing series will be discussing those particular comic books, the themes that lie within, and hopefully learn a lot more about these stories and these characters and the influence of storytelling that the creators got in order to forge these great stories. So, like I said, you bring the smarts, I'll bring the nerd. Is that a deal?
It's a deal.
Okay. So, how you doing?
I'm doing well. You know, Ray, you know me. I'm always excited to talk about the impact of literature on children through adulthood. So this will be a wonderful and new experience for me because, you know, in the past, I've never had any experience with comic books.
Well, like I said, you bring the smarts, I'll bring the nerd. We got plenty of comic books to go over. Excuse me.
Bless you.
I almost choked on my own drink. That's crazy. So, before we get started, what's interesting about all of this is I initially wanted to do it with the approach of comic books up until recently, with all the popular movies that have come out and the impact it has on pop culture most recently in the last 10, 15 years. The literary world was always kind of snobbish about, I guess, the simplicity of the art and the storytelling in comic books, but I don't really want to do that because I just think on our conversations, I just don't think that's the right approach. I think there's so much to talk about with these characters and the history of literature that we don't need to get into any of that stuff.
Okay.
So comic books initially was a book that younger children read.
Yes.
And what I think is interesting about that, I think gets lost nowadays because a lot of adults read them, is that, you know, this is what for years kids were learning to read and write from reading comic books. Well, at least a certain percentage of kids. I mean, it's great, not just you get to see all the cool artwork and you get all of these stories, as well as the conversations the characters are having. It's building up all these skills like reading comprehension. You have to determine, you have to use your imagination to build frame to frame. You don't get like a movie where everything is put in front of you and you can dissect it. You have to use your imagination. And I wish kids were reading a lot more comic books now, because quite honestly, I've seen some of the youth and they need to be smarter.
No, it's not only that. I think we lost the joy of reading because teachers have to teach to standardized tests. So they have to fit within their daily classroom. This much has to be done today, this much tomorrow. Maybe we looked at this theme, but we can't explore it because we have this next theme or this next skill we have to obtain and attain for our students. I also think because of television, and you can correct me if you disagree, TV and computers, students are reading less because they're so technologically oriented. Reading in a way has become a lost art. Warren Buffett, he says that if you aren't reading every single day, a minimum of 50 pages, he thinks because of the way knowledge is exploding, that people are lost. He reads about 500 pages a day, about 50 books a year.
Wow.
And he says, about 90% of his day reading. Can you believe that?
Well,
I believe it.
How about what a good example there, because he's literally the top 1% of income earners in the world.
Yes.
And he's telling you, hey, you should be reading more.
You should be reading more, everyone. And to expand on your idea about how reading helps with creativity, when children are reading, even if there aren't any pictures, and maybe they're not reading a comic book, just a book, they are creating in their minds the picture that they're reading and comprehending. And studies, longitudinal studies about the effects of reading on memory as we age, it's incomparable how wonderful reading is. And
not just in language skills too.
Right.
I mean, the crazy thing is if you walk out, and I don't mean for this to be a slight on younger viewers, but it's almost like nobody can speak properly anymore.
That's right.
Because a lot of what everything you read, everything you listen to, your body is absorbing.
Yes.
Your mind is absorbing that. So if everything you listen to, every other word is is going to make it into your constant vocabulary.
Well, and as you know, texting, it's abbreviations, LOL, and other things. When I was teaching until I retired, the first day I'd say grammar is as important as your creativity and writing skills. And when I would correct papers, I'd say to students, this isn't a sentence, Ray. They would say, what do you mean? And I'd say, what do you mean? and I wasn't making fun of them. Students and people have lost the art of writing a good sentence, subject and verb. So everything you're saying is so accurate.
So as a nice little segue here, when I was growing up, I used to read a lot, mostly comic books. And I've read a lot of books as an adult as well. But when I was younger, it was more whatever the school was making me read for a school assignment.
Yes.
Or if I came home, it was comic books. What were the things that you were reading when you were a kid? Because you said the comic book thing it's relatively new to you.
It's new to me. Well, for one thing, I think, as you mentioned earlier, comic books, it seems as though they were designed for the adolescent male. So in form, in structure, the visuals. I can remember, Ray, it's so funny that you asked this. I think I came out of the womb wanting to read, and my parents knew I'd love to read. They were great readers. And for Christmas and my birthday, I wanted books, books, books. So I was reading, I love mysteries. I was reading Nancy Drew, Hardy Boys, the Bobbsey Twins, Campfire Girls. And my parents, when I was about 7 years old, took me to the library and I got my first library card. Oh, it was such a treasure. I was so excited. So I would go to the library every week. And in the summer, the bookmobile, maybe you're too young to remember this, but the bookmobile came around to our neighborhood. I was so angry because they'd only let you take out 4 books. I mean, I could read those in a day. But the first book that I read that I just was enraptured with, fell in love with, I was 12. My mother bought me A Tale of Two Cities, Charles Dickens. And I wondered if I was going to like it. But the first sentence, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I was captured. I was hooked. And I read it day and night. I'd be up in the attic with a little light, like a lantern, and reading. And I read it, anything and everything I loved. In school, I was always ahead in my classes, not a pat on the back, because I love to read. I would just get ahead, get ahead, get ahead. I think maybe a little OCD enters this, but I'm not sure.
I call that it's the gremlins in my head.
The gremlins in your head, yes.
The gremlins, the demons in my head that need to be satisfied.
Okay, you choose to call them demons, but maybe they're angels.
You're absolutely right. I'm not saying there's anything bad about it, because I am a bit of an OCD nut myself, especially if you start to look behind me a little bit.
It's wonderful. I'm so excited. I wish you would take your camera and pan around to everything you have out. It's so.
That will be another video.
Another video. Okay.
If you can see in the background here, as I'm knocking the headphones out of my ear, all of these long boxes of comic books, all bag boarded, alphabetized, and
wow,
whatever. So there's a whole process that goes into all of it. So I can appreciate the OCD when somebody brings it up, because those goblins are alive and kicking in my head.
Yeah, I know it's a love-hate relationship. My books, I must have, well, I'm reduced since I moved, but I used to have about 4,000 books. Now I'm down to about 1,000, but I have them all by genre, and I have them alphabetical, and the same way with CDs and my movies. So that's for another segment also.
How satisfying is it though, once it's all done and you have it organized, you just look at it and you're just like,
yeah.
It makes perfect sense.
There's some soulmate-ness going on here.
So
what was one of the first books you remembered outside of comic books that you enjoyed?
So early on, there was one book in school. Oh, I'd have to look it up and see who the author is, but it was a summer reading deal. And so it is a book called The Last Mission by Harry Mazer.
Is it science fiction?
No, it's actually a World War II story. So, and it's been years since I've read it, and I've been meaning to pick it up again, because for whatever reason, so I wasn't a good student in school. I did not do very well. I was a underachiever, and I didn't do anything unless it was absolutely necessary. So when summer reading came around, that was a book, and it just was a random deal. You get the whole list of books, and most of the books are gone at the library. This one was left over, and I had to read it, and it's great. It's probably one of the reasons why I'm such a history buff when it comes to World War II era, but it's essentially about like a 16-year-old kid who steals his brother's social security card and enlists in the Air Force in World War II, and becomes a member of the flight crew on a B-17.
It's a true story or based on true?
No, I don't think it's a true story, but that wasn't something that was uncommon back then anyway.
Right.
16-year-old kids lying and saying, yeah, no, I'm really 18, and they get to serve in the war. It's not like they have, they can background check you at 1941.
Yeah, the computer system was different.
But it was a great novel. It was, his life from that period, getting out of school, enlisting, becoming brothers with your, fellow soldiers, and learning all those things that you can't learn on the farm anymore. You fall in love, how to deal with relationships, how to deal with the pressures of fighting a war, and then returning home, having to explain to people exactly what your experience was. Is it worth talking about? It was just fascinating. So it was like, for me, it was like, man, I can't believe I got to read this book to I can't put it down. And
It's
before you
wonderful.
know it, within like a day and a half, I was like done with the book. And
How old?
between all my playtime and comic books and all the other distractions, coming home and watching Batman or whatever, I managed to find the time, and I wrote this great essay and had a really good report, except it was late because I didn't start reading it until school had started.
So did you lose points for that?
Yes, I lost points for that, but it is. And then ever since then, I've read all sorts of books. I like a lot of biography stuff, depending on what it is. Usually like it'll be a particular athlete or somebody that I like and read more about them. I mean, right behind me, I have some books like the Beatles anthology, The Art of Rush, and hey, look at this, an X-Men classic omnibus right behind me.
Excellent, excellent.
But if it's something, it's the OCD goblins kicking in. If I really like it, I have to know everything there is to possibly know about that particular topic or person.
Well, I feel the joys of reading, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is that not only does it teach a child creativity, they can read like you did about the man, but it helps you make judgments about society, about war, about history, about characterization. And if a child isn't reading, he or she is losing out on those aspects of culture and learning. And child psychologists tell you children need to grow up in a house of books. If you can't buy them, go to the library and read every single day to your child. And you had that experience. I don't know if your parents encouraged that. I'm sure they did, but you took it upon yourself to pick that book and to like it and hand it in late. So,
well, the way I figured it at the time was, is probably is going to count for 20% of my grade on the year. So I can get at least 20% of the way there and then slack off for a marking period.
Oh my goodness.
It's stupid kid rationale.
You should have been.
Which worked for me. I mean, it worked out great for me, let me say. Thank God it was a lot easier with the kids.
Yeah.
All I'm saying.
Gotcha.
So I chose this particular story, the Phoenix Saga. One, because it's my favorite comic book story. I even got my little shirt on.
Nice.
Yep.
Is that Jean/Phoenix?
Yes, it is.
Nice.
And I actually have some more back there.
I saw her.
There's little phoenixes all over the place. But I chose that, and while technically the story is only about 7 or 8 issues long, I took this large set because it's kind of like, to me, it's like to only read those 7 issues is like tuning in to watch a movie and only seeing the last third of it.
Gotcha.
There's a whole lot that goes in. Why should you care about these characters? You're not personally invested. So the issue count is rather high at 44. But you get everything you need. So when you get to that roller coaster ride of a story, you're emotionally invested in the characters, in the story, and everything. Mm-hmm. So it's not just a quick, okay, there's a lot of context that's missing. Mm-hmm. Because there's as we'll talk about in episodes further, there are a lot of elements in this story that's a slow burn. Very little details that are just thrown out there that seem inconsequential, that all of a sudden you get 15 issues in and you go, oh, that's right. I forgot about that. So that's why, to me, it was important. But there is so much in these books to go over. So a lot of characters to introduce, and the classic X-Men run. I chose this route because, to me, it is the most comprehensive version of this story. And I know that there's going to be people watching this going, oh, you just got to read the Uncanny X-Men comic books issue, 94 to no. Because of what comic books do very regularly is they call it a retcon. They rewrite past history.
Yes.
Okay, so what this series did is it reprinted the book starting in 86 from 10 years ago and added little backup stories and little details, because what had happened to some of these characters changed over time. So how it was originally written in the 70s, not so, some of those stuff isn't as important as to what was going on in the 80s. So in having conversations with you, I thought it would be a very interesting conversation, well, several conversations, but it'd be an interesting to kind of start with a little bit of a brief history. And we need to place context to everything. So when these stories first started, it's one of the things that I found fascinating, and going back and reading these stories, and I've read them several times, when I see things on TV about the lack of inclusion or the lack of diversity,
Yes.
I sometimes struggle with that, in that, especially in the comic book world, because all the books that I was reading were very diverse. There was lots of different characters. And you're getting to see this stuff now. This is my favorite book. This is the X-Men is really what I read. It's like, I didn't see a lot of damsels in distress. You know, the female characters weren't just thrown off to the side and, you know, hey, I hope some man saves me.
Yes.
The X-Men weren't written that way, not by Chris Claremont. So it'd be interesting to kind of get some of your takes on that and what you thought about reading some of this stuff.
Well, I found in reading the comic books, and again, it was my first foray into this genre. First of all, I found what you said about women. I taught a class about myth and meaning and fairy tales. And as you know, many young girls and boys were taught that there is the prince on the white charger who comes in and saves the princess. Or Rapunzel, let down your golden hair so I can save you. I did not see that at all. Jean Grey is a perfect example in Storm of women who have fought to be their own person, and their colleagues, the other X-Men, don't treat them like damsels in distress. Maybe sometimes they, because the woman might be in a position of danger as well as a male colleague, they go in and need to help. I found that very interesting. I also found that because they were written in a different era and then they were republished in 1986.
Yes.
Okay. Stories somewhat changed also. The inclusion of diversity, the inclusion of Black characters as well as white, and characters from every different social and economic strata. I was reading through information you sent me about Captain America. When it originally was written, it was during World War II, and he was like a sentinel or a guardian of liberty. And that changed over the years to include diversity and to show that there should be equality. There should be a recognition that we are all equal. And because our skin is different, our language is different, et cetera, there should be no difference in how we treat each other. So I found that to be true. The other thing I found, Ray, is that like all good literature, comic books can be read on an allegorical level. So they're telling one story, but the inference has to do with so many other things. So when they're saving the world, what are they saving the world from? I just find it fascinating. And when I was first reading issue 1, issue 2 was sort of slow. I raced through the next 7. I mean, I couldn't wait. And they present it in a different way that literature in general does. There are the visuals as well as the textual content, which is very important in their structure, in their form. So it's all new, it's all interesting, and it just reinforces that I feel comic books is a genre in itself of literature, not a subgenre.
See, the X-Men is a great starting jumping off point because there's so much nuance to the X-Men
Yes.
that many people don't realize. A lot of people realize their exposure to the X-Men is through Hugh Jackman and some movies, some
Wolverine.
good, some bad. And Hugh Jackman is a specimen.
Yes.
I would love to look like that guy, but it's not just a bunch of pretty people on the page posing well.
That's right.
Okay. The whole premise behind what started the X-Men was about, so the X-Men launched in 1963, where we had race riots,
Yes.
and we had all of these heavy issues going on in the country. And according to the Comics Code, which was a body, a council that essentially was providing oversight to comic books, because, you know, we don't want to do anything that is going to mess up and disturb the youth. You couldn't write anything about race relations at the time. So the geniuses at Marvel said, well, let's make mutants. They are who they are. They were born this way. You know, yeah, they got all these different things that happen to them, powers, abilities, or whatever, but they're human and they were born that way. They can't help it. That's who they are.
And that's how they got around censorship.
That's how they got around censorship. So really, the introduction of mutants was a way to tackle issues that were affecting the Black and white communities all over the country, except they couldn't use black and white. You know, so it's kind of fascinating. With Charles Xavier was actually meant to be more of a Martin Luther King,
yes,
in the mutant world, while as Magneto was more of the Malcolm X,
yes.
the more militant member of the group. But they introduced all these new ideas that were easily accessible to young kids.
What was interesting with your comparison, I read a little bit about that also. Martin Luther King was a pacifist, and he did not believe in any violence at all. And they compared that to, as you said, Professor Xavier. The other comparison, he believed in violence and believed in killing, and Malcolm X did not. He wanted two separate worlds to live in harmony, but separate. The Black world would live here, the white world would live here. So it's interesting that those comparisons were made, which again is another allegory or reference in comic books. And there's so many. I mean, not every page, but every issue, there is some sort of reference to an issue, whether it's cultural, religious, political, etc.
Right. And all of these characters, which is another thing that kind of set the X-Men apart from your Superman and Batman stories, was all of these characters are loaded with conflict. And I'm not talking just physical conflict. I'm talking, you know, they have religious views that they have to tackle, or they have to reconcile their own abilities, the fact that they're a mutant and they're hated by everybody.
Yes.
You know, so a team of X-Men are going to get up and save the day for the people that don't care for them at all. You know?
That's interesting too. And when you talk about them being mutants, Nightcrawler, our first introduction to him, he's a mutant and he can change. I guess he changes later on. He had this little device that he can appear human. And then I think that he eventually rejects it and just keeps in his mutant shape and style. But people called them monsters, which we'll get into maybe not today, but later on. But they were considered monsters. And one of the things I looked at, one of the themes I looked at is X-Men as monsters, as mutants. And in a way, Charles Xavier, can we ask the question, is he the Frankenstein of the Mutant Academy? Which, we don't have to discuss today, or if you have time, maybe we'll get into it. But William Blake, a wonderful poet and artist, he was, to me, one of the first authors who incorporated not only his poetry and his writings with his drawings. And his books are absolutely works of art, beautiful. But he said, what we call is what we become. If we call something evil, we become evil. If we call something a monster, we become a monster. We create what we abhor. We create what we hate. And we see that all the time. Politics, religion, literature.
Nonsense.
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 Yes.
We're loaded with nonsense.
Yes.
It's amazing that, not to get into some big geopolitical story, we essentially are tackling the same problems that we've had for the last couple hundred years.
Yes.
And with all of this intelligence that we seem to amass and gather, we just still can't seem to get it right for one reason or another.
Because we don't learn.
Right.
Shakespeare was tackling some of the same issues in his writing and his playwriting and his poetry that your authors are tackling in the X-Men and other comic books. In The Merchant of Venice, the depiction of Jews is horrific. And he's trying to say to the playgoers, most people couldn't read, so they went to plays. And they saw all of Shakespeare in the theaters in London and when they went out on the road. But there was so much prejudice. Othello, the Black man who eventually, because he's betrayed by Iago, his best friend, betrays him because he's jealous of his wife. There was prejudice against the Black man, and prejudice against the Jew, and prejudice against women. And women had to marry people their parents said they had to marry. Can you imagine Jean Grey being told she had to marry Wolverine, for example?
I tell you what, I don't know what has changed in that regard, because to get any of my kids to do what they're told to do, no matter how small, seems to be a challenge. But yet years ago, your parents were able to dictate your life. That to me sounds crazy. I wish in some ways we can still do that, because I think life would be a little bit easier in some regards. Yeah, I know. No, I don't want any of the oppression and all the bad stuff that goes with it. But, sometimes what I say in my house is, if you just listen to me 25% of the time, your life would be a lot easier. Not that I'm all knowing, but, as a parent, because you're a parent, you see the bad coming a mile away.
Oh, you do.
And they have to run right into it.
They do, and that's how they learn. We learn more by our mistakes than we learn by our successes. But not only am I a parent, I'm a grandparent. I see it.
Good luck.
Yeah, then you really have to let people grow and expand. You offer suggestions, which Shakespeare was, and these stories offer suggestions to us. Is this the right way to handle the situation? Is this not the right way?
It's fascinating.
It is.
And you get all this by reading. And
yes.
The other
Thank
thing,
you.
And I'm kind of backtracking a little bit, because I think this is an important thing to cover, is when you're reading a book and you're reading a comic book, you're experiencing the book for what it is. It's conversations between multiple people in multiple situations in the confines of that book. There is none of this tit for tat back and forth that you're having with people. Okay, you're getting all of the information and you're having to make decisions.
Yes.
And think about what it is that you're reading. You got to process that. If we read just a little bit more, I think that would carry over a little bit more into our daily conversations, where we learn to listen and process information from other people, conversations, before we stop and just start throwing points.
Yes. Well, and again, we see that today in the political scene. What are people, if they're listening to other people, what are they listening to? Are they listening to people who regurgitate exactly what they want to hear? Are they listening only to one station, reading only one newspaper, watching one news channel? Or are they trying to get both sides of the story or both sides of the issue? We don't, as you say, we don't see a lot of that. And reading can help you through those sorts of decisions by reading a variety of authors, issues, discussions.
Well, brilliance comes from perspective.
Yes, it does.
Okay, you can be the smartest person in one particular subject. Great, we all need that. But if everything you know is from one source, you're cheating yourself, because whether it be politics or any conversation at work or at home or whatever, you have to be walking into it, and this is at least the way I approach it, that you can't always be the smartest person in the room.
No.
Listen to what other people are saying. You may disagree, and that's great, but at least you're going to kind of get perspective as long as the other person is able to properly articulate their point. Read everything.
Yes.
Don't just watch one channel, watch it all. Yes. Don't just read one comic book, read different comic books. There's different heroes, situations. Don't just read one book. Like, I know you're a mystery buff, but that's not the only thing you read.
No. I read a lot of current political thought, a lot of biography. I read very little fiction other than mystery. Mystery is my go-to at night. I'm tired, I'm relaxing. They call the British mysteries cozies for a reason. They're cozy. There's not a lot of blood and gore, and it just can lull you into relaxation. But I read everything and both sides of the question, because disagreement with someone can bring about agreement or acceptance.
You know, it's fascinating because, and this gets us back to the X-Men and the allegory of race relations.
Yes.
It took a lot of people to disagree on how we deal with the civil rights issues in this country. We got there not by agreement, we got there by disagreeing.
That's right.
Okay, and it was in that disagreement where a larger conversation can be had. And that's what we're missing nowadays. I know we kind of went around, but I think it's important that we have that conversation, because we should be able to talk to each other and work through issues verbally before wanting to punch each other in the face because of who you voted for 8 years ago. None of that absolutely matters. Because whether you voted for the one guy or the other guy, it doesn't really matter. We're still in a mess now. So
Amen.
How do we start solving these problems? And I find it hard to believe that our problems are a lot more challenging than what FDR and Churchill had to deal with in the late 30s, early 40s.
And I'm not trying to make this simplistic, but I think the more we rely on technology and immediate response, I mean, I'm the first one to Google everything. What? Oh, I didn't know that. I'll Google this, I'll Google that. We get immediate response. Therefore, I think we have this immediate reaction without, we look at it, we find a sound bite, and we respond instead of being able to mull over what it is we're looking at or questioning. You know, in the 40s and the 50s, they had radio, and you were lucky if you had a radio. And so a lot of people did not know what their politicians looked like or how they voted. It would take days, weeks, months to get that information. We get it so quickly. And I think we misinterpret. One sentence doesn't describe an issue. One sentence doesn't help you understand a vote.
Because there's not a whole lot of context to that one sentence.
That's right.
So it's fascinating you said that, because on the radio, you would get whole speeches from the president.
Yes.
And you knew exactly what he was saying and what he was trying to get at. Nowadays, it's the TikTok, Twitter, 140 characters that could be taken so many different ways. I mean, how many times have you just sent a text to a friend of yours and they get all defensive about something because they read something you wrote that was so simple and innocuous as being something offensive? It's like, no, I didn't mean it like that.
They heard something different.
Mm-hmm.
Reading a text, I like to write a letter. I like to make a call. I like writing a note. When you read a sentence, like you said, the context is lost because you don't hear the voice. You don't hear what that person is saying. And I think it's fascinating to me that in the X-Men and the writers go over and tell the issue in different ways with different characters on an ongoing basis, which again, to me, is one of the wonderful things about comic books, because it's episodic and nothing is ever over. So from not just from one page to the next and one issue to the next, but what's going on in the whole world of that DC comic, I'm sorry, like Marvel. Wash my mouth out with soap. That Marvel.
No, you're fine. DC Comics is good too.
Well, they do the same thing, but I feel Marvel shows the characters more as, even though they're mutants, for example, more as characters, humans, mutants with flaws. They're not, even though they have superpowers, they're not supermen without any problems. They're like you and me, just because we don't have the mask that Cyclops does that can send these rays out, doesn't mean we don't have the same issues that he does.
Right. And that also too, they have, so if you break down each character, every character in these books fall under the most generalized, they're a mutant and they have abilities.
Yes.
But that doesn't describe each and every character.
No.
Okay. Every single character is totally different from the next. Cyclops is a great example. So Cyclops is a mutant. He shoots these optic blasts from his eyes that he actually can't control it. So he doesn't have the ability to just walk around and go pew, 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 and decide when and where to shoot. If he's not wearing his visor and he opens his eyes, it's just constant blast. And at least before they changed it several times, that was due to brain damage he received from an accident when he was young.
Yes.
Okay, so part of his conflict is, one, he's the leader, so he's always got to be the man in charge. He's always got to have the right decision. He always has to make the right choices because there's people that depend on him. But at the same time, he doesn't feel like he can just join everybody else and be a regular person like some of these other mutants, because he can't control it. He can't. So he used to walk around with this big ass visor, or later on, he ends up getting these red glasses, which he still feels kind of awkward about. Nightcrawler is another example.
Yes.
He literally looks like a demon. He can't go to the mall. And, they kind of get around it with some Stark tech. It's like basically a holographic image of a regular person so he can go out and experience things. But like you said earlier, he ends up getting away from that because he's proud of who he is.
Yes.
And we should be in more of a position where, we should be accepting of other people, but never bitter about it.
Never bitter. Their superpowers are heaven and hell for them. They are so conflicted all of the time. And the superpower that they have also makes them appear to humans, again, we talked about it, as a monster. People don't trust them. Therefore, they have moved the young mutants. The professor has moved them into his school, but they're living in a community that is not inclusive. It's exclusive, which again, when you're looking at modernism and postmodernism, how that comes about in literature, how people look at what's happening to us, that we are moving away from the individual and from the contact and from the personal to the mechanized, to the technology, and to being in either elitist communities or in hovels.
It's interestingly you mentioned that, because I never quite thought of it that way. Because the way it's presented in the book is, well, I'm going to collect all these mutants. I'm going to bring them here so they're safe, because their powers manifest during puberty. All of a sudden, these explosions are happening, and they can at least come to the school, learn to control their abilities, and then go back off and rejoin society as if they're ill or whatever. But at the same time, I never thought about it from that perspective, in that, okay, well, you're creating an exclusive community where the mutants are just surrounded by other mutants.
That's right.
That's interesting. I never thought about that.
Only because of the exclusive nature of his community. And you look at them, and then you look at the other, what was the other group? The Hellraisers.
The Brotherhood of Evil Mutants?
Yes. You look at them, and they've done the same thing, but for negative reasons. The professor is doing it for positive reasons for humanity. But even when they go back, when you look at Nightcrawler, will he go back to Bavaria? Will he go back to Germany? Won't he still be, and this is a rhetorical question, won't he still be viewed as a monster, something different? Anything that's different, it seems, in society today and in the past is viewed with suspicion. Therefore, we don't trust, even if it's all good, if what they're doing is all good. So, and this is brought out, of course, in X-Men and in the professor's life, and also in their own individual lives, which all literature portrays the flaws of characters as well as the virtues.
So now the original characters in the book were Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, Iceman, and Angel. But that book wasn't very popular. And after several issues, they, rather than cancel the title, they ended up reprinting stories, reprinting older issues, until they got to about 1975. And Chris Claremont, who was writing on other little books, was offered a book. And he said, "What book do you want?" And he says, "I want the X-Men." And then he ended up changing the X-Men. So the book originally was more about these 5 high school kids, okay, between the ages of 16 and 18, right around there. He wanted to do something different. He wanted a mix of, well, kids, younger people, not necessarily kids, but younger people and adults. So, and he wanted to, because Marvel was trying to expand their brand globally. It was like, okay, well, let's get a Canadian, let's get a Scot, let's get a Russian on here. I mean, how cool would that be? So we'll get this guy on the team. He's Russian. 1975, you're still in the middle of the Cold War.
That's right.
Russia is not our friend. Okay, you have Nightcrawler from Germany, Aurora, Monroe, Storm from Africa.
Yeah.
You know, so you have all these different people, all these different personalities. You have a Native American in Thunderbird, and they all have remarkably different personalities. How do you get all of these people I mean, the conflict right is just basically it's organized chaos right there. Without the bad guy, you already have so much conflict with
Among the good
characters.
guys. Yeah.
Among the good guys, right?
Yeah.
And you never find, and this is one thing about the X-Men books, which I always think is fascinating, is there was never this gung-ho, hey, let's go save the day. No, it was, you know what? I don't want to do that. You have a character like Colossus who hates conflict. He's the strongest guy on the team. His body is covered in metal, but he doesn't want to punch anybody. He doesn't want to hurt anybody. He wants to read and paint. You know, that's all he wants to do.
He wants everyone to get along.
Yeah, he wants everybody to get along. I said, why do we have to punch this guy in the face? I mean, why do I want to do that? And then the shortest guy on the team, Wolverine, is the guy that wants to punch everybody in the face for any reason whatsoever. That just seems to be the answer to everything, is violence. Storm has this real interesting dynamic in that, you know, they add all these little details. Again, she still is, everyone has varying degrees of control over their abilities. But because Storm grew up in Africa, where she was essentially worshipped as a goddess, she had a hard time getting over wearing clothes.
Yes.
You know, so to have the conversation, you know what, you just can't float around in the rain naked. You know, we don't do that here. You know, so she's got a learning curve even before they go on like their first mission. Everybody has got problems and lots of little things that they have to, because most of them were loners before they have to start working as a team.
Storm's character is so interesting. And at the end of your first series, when she is in Ireland with the Banshee and everyone else, and she is, you find out, claustrophobic.
Yep.
And she is paralyzed. So you look at, like you said, again, all these people, they're so different. How do they get along? There's organized chaos. She, to me, seems so serene and so in control, other than the clothes issue, which is really...
That gets solved pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's not really her issue. It's our issue. But you know, when she was so claustrophobic and she tried and tried to overcome that because her colleagues were in danger. So they're like everyone else. Ray Hale with his issues, Charlene Williams with her issues. But tell your audience, what's the main difference between the mutants and the rest of us?
We're not in a comic book.
Accept that.
No, we all have to figure a way to work through our conflicts,
Yes.
our issues.
Yeah. And it seems like it's like Starship, whatever, 99, calendar 99. They're there for the good of the universe. I think the X-Men, through the professor, they're trying to help humanity, whether it's rejected or not, the aid, the help, the assistance. That, I think that's sort of a difference too. Mm-hmm. Not that we aren't good people, but we're generally, our struggle is not for the good of humanity. It's more personalized, individualized, therefore probably more selfish.
Which is what all of them, and some of these characters, if you ever read past these 44 issues, you'll find some of these characters go from being the typical good guy to later on being a bad guy.
Yeah.
Things change, your perspectives change, your personal experiences will define you. So if you go through a horrible period, you may not be the same guy that comes out at the end of it.
What I like, though, and you had emphasized this to me prior to today, is eventually it seems, regardless of what journey they're on, and we haven't gotten to the hero's journey, we might maybe in another episode, but they come back to the X-Men, most of them in one form or another. Phoenix seems to change quite a bit from Jean Grey to
a
Phoenix.
lot of history there.
Yes, but again, it's so interesting. Again, it's an allegory, like you just said, of how individuals go through life. What you are at birth, at 2, at 10, at 20, at 50, you're changing.
And this story, and I think we'll see this in the coming episodes too, is this story encapsulates everything, whether it's what is it to be a hero? What does that mean?
Yes.
It's not just put your red cape on and, save the girl that's falling out of the helicopter. What exactly is a hero? What does that mean? What is humanity? What is it to be human? What makes us good? What makes us inherently evil?
And what's our responsibility? Right.
Right.
Power. And what responsibility do we have, if any, to each other?
And the thing that I don't remember exactly where I first heard it, but it's something that's popped up, and we can't ever seem to remember this phrase, but absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, yesterday I just saw a thing about the Washington Commanders or whatever, the CEO or whatever there for a pro football team is in some sexual harassment thing. And it's like,
every day,
all this money and power eventually corrupts everybody. And so what would happen if someone gave you the powers of a god? What would you do with it?
Well, would you reject it? Would you accept it?
Would you reject it? Would you accept it? And if you did accept it, what would you do with it?
Well, and again, like you just said, absolute power absolutely corrupts. I think it's very difficult to have all that money, all that power, whether it's political or financial or social or cultural. You look at these young singers who don't survive into their 20s because they can't handle the fame. You look at politicians who invariably, many of them end up in a scandal, whether it's financial, personal, sexual, illegal happenings. So these X-Men have a lot of power, but they don't have absolute power.
No, they don't. But it's an interesting ride. There's a lot of bits and pieces to this story. Now, I do want to circle back to something you said earlier about Charles Xavier. Is he the Dr. Frankenstein?
That's just a rhetorical question.
Yeah, but I actually would like to get into that because that's fascinating to me, because it's got my gears turning. So what did you mean by that? Okay.
Mary Shelley wrote when she was 18, 20 years old, the book Frankenstein. And there's so much discussion about, did she create it or did her husband Percy create it? But she created a creature through Dr. Frankenstein in her novel. And the creature that was created, given birth to, was what most people call a monster. She took parts from other human beings. She made him a giant, his skin, his hands. She tried to give him a mate, and the character, Dr. Frankenstein, who was creating the monster, a lot of people call the monster Frankenstein. Well, you can look at it two ways. It was Dr. Frankenstein created the character, but we talk about Frankensteins as monsters in modern day life, whatever it is. So she created this being who created a monster. And I've looked at the questions concerning the professor. He's bringing all these young people to the school, and they really have to follow his rules, so to speak. They're there because he's trying to protect them. And yet at the same time, if he's parental, is he really allowing them to be who they are? Or is he creating this elitist force that's supposedly doing things for humanity, for the betterment of humanity, But in fact, is he creating little monsters within each one of these individuals? Because do they really have free choice? These are some of the questions that have come up about him being Frankenstein. So throughout literature, we see this where characters create, whether it's children or monsters, create something that turns into a horror, not because the creation was a horror in itself, but because the creator was. So that is one of the readings I was using when I look at the professor. And we know he's a good person, but I think in one of the descriptions of the professor, it said he tries not to think about personal gain. He could very easily have personal gain. And he's somewhat manipulative. And Dr. Frankenstein was very manipulative with his creation. He created a mate for this monster. And then because she was so beautiful and her feminine wiles was taking the monster away from the creator, he destroyed her. And so there are similar themes in Frankenstein, Shelley's Frankenstein, that there are in Professor Xavier's school and in his characterization.
See, that's fascinating to me because just talking about this thing, there's another thing that you kind of brought out that I never really put much thought into. Is Professor Xavier, the Frankenstein creating Frankenstein's monster, is everything he's doing, is it all well-intentioned? Because at the same time, he is sending children off to fight a battle.
That's right. He says no violence, and yet what has he created? A danger room. What does he have them learn in this danger room? Now, I'm not taking sides yet. I haven't read the whole series. And beyond the series, maybe there's something else. I don't know. I have a tendency wanting to read ahead, yet I want to stay within your parameters of what we're doing currently.
Well, it's interesting because, what we're talking about now is something that is explored much later, well past the issues that you're reading, into something more current. And it's come up a couple of times in the books is, how much of a good guy can he be if he's doing all of these bad things?
Yes. For
so long, you can only use it for so many times. Well, maybe what I did was bad, but it was for a good reason.
Yes.
Is how are you different than the bad guy
who's doing the same thing for a bad reason?
Mm-hmm.
But also, I wish I could find the essay. There was an essay about the government, and it doesn't matter. We'll talk about the American government, but any country's government. Is the government of Frankenstein a Dr. Frankenstein when they recruit young men and women into their armies and send them off to war to die, because the end result is freeing a nation, protecting America, helping them grow into better citizens, whatever? I mean, is it a moot point that parents, Dr. Frankensteins, when they're trying to teach their children to be good, and some of the things they have to do, possibly as a punishment? So it's interesting.
It's a necessary evil.
Yes.
But now how necessary is that evil? And these are all this really matters in the grand scheme of things. Anything, whether you're picking up a comic book or you're turning on the nightly news, just because a good guy is doing this, or someone who says, I'm a good guy, I'm one of the good guys, just because they're doing it, is it good that they're doing it? One of the things that popped up in this actually was for a Superman story was, Superman's got all of these abilities and he can apply it to, mutants. So what? They have all these abilities and he has this ability to intervene, but nobody stopped and asked the question, is this something he should intervene on?
Yes.
And it's kind of like, well, hold on a second. You got a point.
Yeah.
Like, just because he's super doesn't mean he has to save every day.
Others can do it. It's
others can do it.
But taking it one step further, why did Stan Lee, who we can call, therefore, maybe, Dr. Frankenstein, create all of these characters, including the professor? He was he
kind of depends on who the writer is on any particular book.
Right.
But in this case, what Stan Lee was aiming at, in just about any case, really, is fallible heroes.
Yes.
No bulletproof. I always say this, and I absolutely love Superman, but it's hard to have conflict with Superman when you can't have a physical altercation because he's just so insanely powerful. Mm-hmm. So it's always more of a psychological conflict with Superman.
And always good. Awesome.
And always good.
Yeah.
But is it always good though? At the same time, is I think what we should be talking about is it's okay, it's great that we have all these heroes to come in and save the day for us, but reality is we shouldn't have been in this mess to begin with.
Right.
And when you're relying on these people, you're leaving a lot on the table that us regular people should be cognizant of and fixing.
So we're regular people. Right?
We're regular people, at least right now. I mean, all my powers are tapped out at the moment. It's
Mine
getting
too.
late, so they need to recharge. It's kind of a solar thing. It's weird. It's complicated.
Okay.
But I think we're going to see a lot of this play out here in this Phoenix Saga. So a lot of these questions are going to be asked, especially as we continue to get to know some of these characters and we get to see the Phoenix manifest. What does all of this mean? And where does that put Jean Grey?
Yes.
Because she goes through a whole mess of changes here, some subtle, some not so subtle, and how that affects everybody around her.
Well, if you look at Campbell's journey for the hero, which we can get into another episode, she follows, he has a set journey, and you can have 10 stages, 8 stages, or 3. Presented the issue, go out and try to take care of it, and come back and bring to society what you've learned. And it's over. The hero's journey there is over. In the comic books and in X-Men, it's never over. One journey turns into another journey. So there's a lot of discussion out now about the hero's journey and how has it changed since Campbell wrote about the hero's journey. And also the journey has changed. Before it was for men, then the feminine was introduced, and then different cultures, and how are their journeys different because they face prejudice, whereas generally the white man on his journey possibly did not. He had obstacles, but not the prejudice of gender or race. So that'll be good looking at Jean.
And not to mention, I also think what's also different about this book is that there are real life consequences for these characters. It's not just beginning of the issue, hey, bad guys robbing a bank, and the good guys have to come in, save the day, turn them over to the police officer and say, thank you, sir, have a good day, and then go back home and everybody goes to sleep. Some of these characters have to do stuff that they're not comfortable with.
Yes.
And they're going to end up in situations that when they come home to their bed, they're not going to sleep very well.
Yeah.
And it's just more layers of conflict for some of these characters. You can't show up and be super powered and do all of these amazing things and take out the bad guy, and people will get hurt along the way and be able to go to sleep real easy at night.
No, and I think that's why some of them, even in this series, leave the X-Men. Maybe they come back later, but they say, okay, like you just said, I have to pull back. I can't do this anymore.
I mean, we're going to see right in the very first issue, and we'll get into this next time,
yes,
is almost immediately, you know, once the original team of X-Men is captured and this second team comes in, once that second team shows up, that's like everybody else is like, good, you guys got it, I'm out. I'm gonna go live life now. I didn't want to be a superhero, not necessarily in a negative way, but the pressure's off for them to step up and assume this mantle. These guys got it. Hey, the Canadians got it. We're out.
the new guys. And there's also just maybe a tad of jealousy.
Yes.
We're the originals. You're
Yes.
not, you know.
This is our house.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's our professor.
It's our professor. It's our house. What are you doing? But at the same time, the interesting thing, though, is that those original characters, they were kids.
Yes.
Young.
Yes.
So they haven't, even though they're out saving the world monthly when these issues come out, they haven't matured. They haven't matured very much.
Yes.
How many 17, 18, 19-year-old kids are as mature? You don't actually mature till, I almost think it's like 30 is like the age. You hear all sorts of numbers. Well, like 26 and, you know, puberty ends right around this. No, it's not just about puberty. It's about experience and knowledge and maturity.
I agree.
So we're going to see some of those journeys with some of these characters. And that's the whole thing is fascinating. But, you know one of your favorite books is Jane Eyre. And I know the Phoenix Saga is not necessarily Jane Eyre, but I think there's a lot. It's probably more similar than it is different.
I totally agree. She is actually, if you want to call her this, an anti-heroine. And she does not brook any interference with her life when she's an adult, including Mr. Rochester, who wants her to be his mistress. And she says no. And so I think Jane Eyre is a wonderful subject. I did some research again on that. We can talk about her and Jean for another time.
For another time. Sweet. Well, this has been very interesting. It's been fascinating. I'm starting to re-examine Charles Xavier. I never would have looked at it that way. I mean, you see things now, but I'm not a big fan of the way the stories are written now. I like more of I always say the silver and bronze 60s, 70s, 80s, getting into the early 90s. That's, in comic book terms, it's the silver bronze era.
Yes.
Those are the kind of stories, because there's clear line, mostly clear. There is a little gray area, but in most cases, it's easy to identify what is good, what is bad. And not every character, it seems to me, at least as far as my ideals and my morals are concerned, the heroes to me today in many cases are the bad guys. And whoever it is that they're fighting, they may still be bad guys too, but the heroes are not very heroic. We need a Superman now. We need more of these figures. I like the idealism and the moral authority, I like that stuff. And when everything is about, I don't know, crap, And that just kind of seems like, with some of these titles today, I can sit there and give you 20 reasons why Storm is a great character. And it's not because she's black. Whereas and she is.
Yeah.
Okay. But
no, it never who she is. Who she is, you like her, not because of her race.
Right. Whereas today they write characters and they start off with Storm's great, you'll like her, she's black.
Yes.
Well, maybe it's just me, but I was kind of raised in a household where your skin color and your gender didn't matter. So why are we making it matter?
Yeah. Because you don't say, I like Ray because he has brown hair.
Right.
Or I like Ray, he has brown hair.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think all the things that we're not supposed to have a whole lot of value, we're not supposed to put a whole lot of value in, is what we're putting value in.
I agree.
And I don't like Captain America because he's white. And I don't like the Black Panther because he's black. I like them because they're great characters.
Yes.
Okay. That just happens to be, whatever skin color or sexual orientation, whatever, none of that matters. My all-time favorite comic book character is Jean Grey.
Yeah.
And it just so happens she's a woman. So I think if we can start to remember things that way, I think our creators and artists today would be a lot better off. We'd have more interesting stories. It's not enough to say that the character they are Asian, but they have a Twitter account, so they're cool. I don't care if Captain America has a Twitter. What's he going to do in the face of evil? How is he going to process thoughts? What is the conflict? Because there has to be conflict, and it's not just bank robber and a fist. You know what I mean? There has to be more to it, kind of like what I see in these books. Where's Chris Claremont right now?
What you said so important. So-and-so is Asian, but you might as well just stop right there because the but says so much about you.
Mm-hmm.
Not you, the person saying it. So very good, Ray.
Life is good. Get off my soapbox now.
This has been so much fun. And
it has, and I can't wait for the next part.
Okay.
There's so much to talk about. I mean, after all, this is what we were talking about. Yes. So I'm looking forward to
44.
44 issues. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much for taking the time and going through this. I know I gave you a mountain, but it's very interesting conversation. So I think that will go a long way.
I'm doing my best to climb it, and namaste.
Namaste. Well, thank you very much. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye-bye.